I wanted to talk about that reflex that I identified, actually. You can read Mary Daly or Jane Lewis. I actually didn't identify it, they did over a long period of time. And what they identified was how blindness to women, to children, to safeguarding, to care economics, to the institutions that have evolved around this, how blindness to that just led to a failure to consider it, and a reflex response to hit at those systems and those things and undermine those things. And they have observed this over a very, very long time, and I think Mary Daly calls it stripping back at capacities to care. And it's also the capacity to protect, and it's about the fact that if you apply market rationale to an institution that doesn't do that, and it's rationale that can't even see what that institution does, you get the kind of institutional erosion that leads to a system where safeguarding is not observed, where people are harmed, and crisis relating to abuse and neglect. And I'm profoundly grateful at the work that Jane Lewis and Mary Daly did over many, many years, so that I had that body of work to build on at the point in time where we're redefining systems. So that I could just say that that reflex was there. I could put it in the context of system failure that I understood, our welfare system. I could show that these systems were linked very easily, and I could show that the crisis that would now be generated around that would expose that blindness. And I did that at the LSE because that's kind of the home of the disciplines that can't see these things. And one of the things that I had to assess in the last few years is, could they see, and had they ever had the opportunity to see? Because the other thing is that these systems have evolved slowly, and there's not actually been a crisis to force that recognition at that level. So I identified a reflex because that's what you do with a social work assessment. When you can see power dynamics that other people can't see because you're attuned to them and you've been exposed to a lot of power dynamics, you can't make someone see something that they can't see. That's absurd. But what you can do is you can identify that reflex, you can build an assessment, you can identify the reflex, and then as that reflex is at the root of more crises, your kind of hypothesis is validated. And what I realised was that the blind spot I saw was largely about the invisibility of women, about the fact that women haven't stood up and been a political force, that we have a maladaptive left-wing culture who prevent that rather than facilitating it, that our trade unions are not doing that Labour clearly are not, and that what it would require to correct that is women just to stand up. And that's all you have to do, and self-ID has organically provided the crisis that's made you do that. But I wanted to let you know that the minute you have stood up and done that, that you will get recognition of every system and right that women want in the 20th century. You will do that. Even if you don't understand those systems, even if you have no idea what I'm talking about, even if you have no idea about the systems, you don't give a fuck about child protection, you don't understand the systems around domestic abuse, that's alright. You don't have to know any of those things. But just by standing up and being a political force, you, as a generation of women, will get consolidation of all the rights that women in the 20th century fought for. And because policymakers need you to do that, it will very, very quickly become consolidation of those rights at a point in time where system failure means that we have to redefine those systems anyway. So self-ID rather depends on women standing up, opposing self-ID rather depends on women standing up and saying, I recognise that equality for women and children is also about protection from male violence. And I recognise that actually when you undermine that, it puts women and kids at risk. And all you have to do is that with your own life and your own experience. And the reflex that I laid out is being demonstrated. And I can show that these policies have done this, and that if you just look at this, it makes a whole bunch of crises easier to solve. Now I decided to do that I decided consciously to do that in 2011. And I managed to get more or less completed and get that on violent my dissertation, and managed to make sure that in that period I got that on record at a number of major elite institutions. but it would have been for nothing. But all women now have to do is stand up and say, we're women, and we're a political force. And that is demonstrated, and we can consolidate every single right. And not only can we do that, but we can consolidate them, not just for this cycle, which could run for another 70 years, but another cycle after that. So it is within our grasp, right now, just by saying no, to consolidate every right that women won in the 20th century for another 70 or 80 years, and maybe even another 70 or 80 after that, until they're firmly embedded. And that means for the first time in human history, women are not owned, and won't be abused for not being owned, and will have respect for the laws that protect them and their children from violence. That's going to be major, and you will have done that.